Ross Ulbricht, Roger Ver. So, for those that don't know, Ross Ulbricht was the alleged founder of a Bitcoin based website called Silk Road, the initial famous Silk Road from China. And the goal was to just allow basically Bitcoin based eBay activities with no limitation on what products were being sold. And so you had drug deals being done on Silk Road. Now, drug deals have been done on Twitter. They've been done on Facebook. They've been done on YouTube. They've been done over the phone. They've been done by email. They've been done by regular mail. They've been done by every means known to man. He was the first person to be blamed for simply having a site that had people using it for that purpose. There's no allegation that he himself had any role in actually dealing drugs, selling drugs, buying drugs, or any of the rest. So it was always deeply problematic that he was being prosecuted for setting up a website, essentially, where he himself was not complicit in the underlying activities. That's why they falsely alleged that he had used Silk Road to try to solicit people to murder people. They had to drop those charges because the evidence was extraordinarily weak concerning that aspect of the case. They just did that because that was the headline grabber. That would grab the grand jury's attention and the judge's attention, bias everybody against him before people could sit back and say, hold on a second, that was actually a bogus claim. So the first aspect of it was you just had a very novel legal theory being pursued for criminal prosecution and punishment that was contrary to the Section 230 application they were applying to the rest of big tech. So when Google was facilitating terrorism deliberately with algorithmic manipulation or child pornography or other things, U.S. government did nothing except defend and protect those big tech platforms. And yet they go after him. Clearly they went after him because he was a Bitcoin dissident trying to create an independent free market outside of their governmental control and constraint. And I think that was the real principle and primary predicate for actual concern rather than anything illegal he was doing. So what's in common with a lot of these cases, with the Roger Ver case, the Snowden case, the Assange case, pretty much all the January 6th cases, some of the abortion protester cases, the other whistleblower cases, the doctor whistleblower cases, other crypto software developer cases that people have been criminally targeted, is what you find, one of the common elements you find in lawfare, like you see in every single Trump case, is novel legal theories, untested legal theories, trying to use the criminal justice system to invent new crimes, to target people for political reasons. That gets us to part two. Part two of what is in common with all these cases, whether it's Roger Ver, whether it's Ross Ulbricht, whether it's January 6th, whether it's Snowden and Assange or Trump, or the abortion protesters or the whistleblowers that were targeted, or the doctors that were dissident doctors during COVID, what they all have in common as well as a novel legal theory of prosecution is a selective prosecution. That the same behavior and conduct has been routinely and repeatedly done by a wide range of actors that has not been prosecuted. And the only reason these people are being prosecuted is because of their First Amendment protected activities. They were selectively prosecuted. It's the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that precludes and prohibits selective prosecution. The government cannot use its power to criminally prosecute someone because of First Amendment activities. And clearly what separates out these defendants from the other ones that had committed similar or worse acts who were not prosecuted was their politics. So that's the other aspect of this, is selective prosecution. Novel legal theories and with selective prosecution. The third step in almost all of these cases is government malfeasance and misconduct in the way the investigation was handled. This included discovery violations. This included witness intimidation. This included obstruction of an independent investigation. This included outright corruption by the agents involved. What people forget is the lead agents prosecuting Ross Ulbricht were busy robbing from Ross Ulbricht and stealing from him along the way, wherever and whenever they could, including stealing various Bitcoin to try to pocket it for themselves. So you cannot have cases. So the third aspect, novel legal theories, selective prosecution, malfeasance, and misconduct in the investigation. The fourth aspect you have is violation of the rule of impartiality in terms of the venue. And that impacts the grand jury, that impacts the trial jury, that impacts the judicial pool. And in all of these cases, what they also have in common, they have a novel legal theory for criminal prosecution, selective prosecution, government malfeasance and misconduct in the investigation, and fourth, they deliberately violate the impartiality principle of American law. That is the foundation and fundamental premise of what makes America the rule of law. Means you're governed by law, not by corrupt political actors, not by partisan political actors, not by people who have a prejudice, not by a venue other than your community. And here, the Southern District of New York had no basis whatsoever to have jurisdiction over Ross Ulbricht. He wasn't from there. His prosecution was entirely predicated because the Southern District of New York is where you have the most corrupt prosecutors. You have other than the District of Corruption, the most corrupt prosecutors, the most partisan and judges, and the most political jury pools, and the grand jury pool and the jury pool. And then last but not least, the sentence was absurd. 2 life sentences plus like 40 years. It was utterly nuts. It was he got a worse sentence than cartel leaders got. That's how nuts his sentence was. By a judge who was a lunatic, who got who basically used his race against him. Because he was white, he was going to face a harsher sentence. And she even said this on the record. So if you're a drug dealer from the Bronx, e.g. black or Mexican or Hispanic or Dominican, then by golly, she would have gone far lighter on him. That's a clear constitutional violation. And what we have to care about in these cases, I see this happening in the Andrew Tate cases, is people get, and see it happening in the Nick Rekieta cases. People quit being concerned with the Constitution and they get obsessed with the underlying accusations. And what those people are admitting is they don't care about the Constitution. They care more about moral certainty and being able to point the finger of moral blame at someone they don't like, whose behavior they don't like. We should be far more concerned with protecting the Constitution. One bad criminal is far less likely to do severe damage to us than one bad cop, than one bad judge, than one bad prosecutor, than a violation of our Constitution. If the police and the prosecutors and the jurors and the judges know that they don't have to obey the Constitution, then we are all at risk. We are subject to the arbitrary whim of government and its selective motivation. These rules exist to make sure to protect our rights, and the Constitution has to always be first and foremost. And people who get obsessed with the underlying allegation are taking the bait of, it's okay to toss out the Constitution for this defendant. That's okay. Once you do that, you have no Constitution left. It's gone. It's finito. It's just what's convenient. And that's always a mistake, to get caught up and obsessed with what are the underlying allegations about the person, rather than was the process a process we can have confidence in, or does greenlighting this process as a precedent endanger all of us like it did with all the January 6th defendants, like it did with Donald Trump. So that's why we always have to hold the line at the Constitution, no matter who the defendant is, no matter how nasty they may be, no matter how horrible acts they may be accused of. Constitution first, Constitution forever. In Roger Vere's case, it's even much more egregious. Because in Roger Vere's case, you have a guy who was a Bitcoin dissident, who was targeted by the government early on for his political dissident activities when he was a young libertarian and politically active, exposing what happened at Waco, exposing what happened at Ruby Ridge, and the government set him up on completely ridiculous charges. I always tell people, try to guess what the first charge that Roger Ver spent almost a year in federal prison for. Nobody's guessed it yet. Because when I tell them it concerned buying the right size fireworks, they're like, what? That's a federal crime? You're not buying the right size fireworks with the right permit? That's a crime? Yeah, and do you think there's been a bunch of those charges? No. It was because it was, again, a novel legal theory, selective prosecution based on political activities, with corrupt government involvement in the investigation and indictment, and selective prosecution in the venue chosen. So the flash forward, Ulbricht becomes one of the big, Roger Ver becomes one of the biggest advocates for Bitcoin as financial freedom. There was a good number of questions about this that some people who've read and reviewed or listened to hijacking Bitcoin. So what happened with Ver is he became known as Bitcoin Jesus because he was an early advocate for Bitcoin's ability to help people escape the control and the monopoly of central banks and central governments. And that he wanted to unleash Bitcoin's capacity for empowering people to be free of the control of the state through currency. And what he saw was he realized how corrupt the government was. He saw the multiple efforts to sink Bitcoin, sabotage Bitcoin, and to try to co-opt Bitcoin, and realized, okay, I'm going to be opposite the U.S. government on some of these things. And so I know what that's like, what they'll try to do. So I better just give up my U.S. citizenship so they have no legal control over me in the same way as they do because of if I were still a citizen. So in that consequence, he went through the process of going through the exit tax, even though the exit tax is an unconstitutional tax. It's a direct tax on property that is not apportioned amongst the population of the states equally. And they pretend that when you give up citizenship, magically your assets become income. That's just ludicrous. So it's clearly an unconstitutional tax that is yet to be fully adjudicated. He still goes through the process of trying to pay that tax and filing returns and hiring competent, capable tax accountants and advisors, some of the top people in the field, to fully comply. And he does comply. They come in and indict him a month after he publishes hijacking Bitcoin, based on conduct that happened after he was no longer a U.S. citizen, in which they're alleging they had, by the way, during this process, they went in and stole his attorney-client communication files. They got away with it because the lazy Supreme Court decided to stay out of the equation in a meaningful manner. And so what happens is the Ver actually took the advice and complied with his accountants and attorneys. But what did they do? The government lies about it. The government says he withheld information from them. The government says he didn't disclose certain things to them, that he didn't follow their advice. They were lying all along. They lied to the U.S. courts to secure the indictment. They lied to Spanish courts to secure the initial extradition, in which he sits under home detention in Spain. And so and then they find out when they get the actual files that, in fact, the government knew they were lying all along. That, in fact, all the way through, Roger Ver completely complied, provided all the information and advice necessary to his accountants and attorneys, and he complied strictly with it. In fact, they were more aggressive at saying he could pay less tax than he actually paid. That was the situation. And yet suddenly he's being prosecuted, and what do we see? First, a novel legal theory. First, criminal prosecution based on the exit tax I'm aware of. First, criminal prosecution of someone who's not even a U.S. citizen on taxes for money they did not make inside the United States. First time I've ever heard of that. So they're trying to create novel legal. They're basically saying we can create new tax law through selective criminal prosecution. Imagine, we don't got to pass it in Congress. We don't got to get approval in courts. We just got to criminally prosecute you based on and put your liberty at risk for you to assert the unconstitutionality of the tax. So a novel legal theory right out of the gate is step one. The step two is selective prosecution. There's been all kinds of disputes between the IRS and people over exit tax issues. I know of none that have ever reached criminal prosecution. So why Roger Ver? Is it a coincidence Roger Ver is a high-profile political critic of how the U.S. intelligence community is trying to co-opt and sabotage Bitcoin? Does anybody believe that sincerely? Straightforwardly? No. So we got selective prosecution and a novel legal theory. Third, do we have government misconduct in the investigation? They stole his attorney-client records and then lied about it. Yeah, you got an extraordinary case of government misconduct in the investigation and indictment of an extradition request of Roger Ver, including lying to foreign courts and putting in the U.S. courts that they have the right to do so. That's their defense. Isn't that they didn't lie, is that they have a right to lie. That's the degree of arrogance by a high-ranking DOJ tax official that is running this case, according to the motion to dismiss filings that Roger Ver has filed. Then I think the venue they've chosen, I think, is L.A. because they have certain controls there in L.A., even though Roger Ver is not a resident of L.A. and isn't a resident of the United States and isn't a citizen of the United States. So again, they keep choosing jurisdictions where they have friendly jurors, friendly judges, where they're not likely to get an impartial jury pool at the grand jury stage or the trial jury stage or the judicial forum stage. Some of the worst judges in America are in the Central District of New York, right behind the Central District of California, right behind the Southern District of New York and DC. So you have all the same components already present. And then last but not least, a ridiculous disproportionate punishment. They're seeking a 109-year prison sentence for Roger Ver. That is insane, utterly insane. So Hunter Biden, who didn't pay any tax, dodged it for years, gets a straight pardon. And Roger Ver, for protesting the intelligence community's activities in Bitcoin, they're trying to put in prison for 109 years on taxes he didn't owe for a time period he wasn't a U.S. citizen, on property that was in dispute about how you even tax anyway at the time, because they had no idea how to assess Bitcoin. The issue with Bitcoin was when he left, the IRS is now trying to pretend that you could have just sold all the Bitcoin at maximum value. No, you couldn't. The markets were clear that you, in fact, couldn't sell it. And there's the constitutional problem of even forcing that sale in the first place to tax it. But even if you were to consider that constitutional, there were no set rules in place about how to treat Bitcoin in 2014. IRS had no idea whether it was cash, whether it was an asset, whether it was income. They had no idea what it was. It was just a computer algorithm. So it's an attempt to impose retroactive value on things and then being able to tax you retroactively and to do the tax by criminal prosecution and punishment, no less. So it goes to issues of universal impact in terms of our freedoms. That's why I'm advocating for the pardon of Roger Ver. And the same with glad about what happened with Ross Ulbricht.